I'd say the most interesting one I was involved in was probably the anthrax case. After 9/11, we had the anthrax attacks, and Tom Brokaw and the Star newspaper here, and we represented a gentleman, Mr. Stevens, who was the first person to inhale the anthrax and subsequently die from it. And Mr. Schuler was retained on that case, and he brought me in to assist him on it. To this day, that investigation is the largest investigation in FBI history. There were 23,000 subpoenas, and I think it was 4,000 interviews that were done. And we had to handle the civil case, which was a lawsuit against the lab. And what they had done was they took the sample of anthrax that killed him, and they actually identified the genetic genome for that strain of anthrax, much as they would do with a human or a sheep. And they were able then to track it not only back to a specific lab, but a specific room and a specific vial in that lab to determine who had access to it. And we sued the U.S. Army, the Department of Defense, USAMRIID. It was little old me and Schuler going up against all these guys. And every deposition, the amount of suits and uniforms in there was astronomical. And we litigated that case for 13 years and went all the way to the Supreme Court and created law that a private or government lab that's handling dangerous materials now has a duty to use ultra-hazardous care in handling it. And the predicate for that was there was Attorney General inspector reports that showed that there was anthrax and Ebola and monkey virus that were just unaccounted for, that were missing. People didn't even know what anthrax was in the early 80s. They would Federal Express it to labs to do testing on it. It was just absolutely arcane. And because of that case, that law was created, and it generated a safer environment. So I was always proud of the work, and Schuler just was an animal. He was a pit bull on that case. And we got a nice result for our client's family, and that one always kind of sticks out in my mind.
That's amazing that they changed how they handle biological weapons as a result of that lawsuit. If that lawsuit wasn't brought, would it have changed how they handle biological weapons in the United States? So think about it, that's a national security issue, and that lawsuit changed it, so now we're all safer because of that.
Yeah,
it's pretty amazing.
That is, and you think, I remember the immortal quote. Dr. Ahmed was one of the witnesses we deposed, and when he talked about the security at USAMRIID, his quote was, "It was worse than a 7-Eleven." And there was no video system, there was no slide car system, there was no buddy system, and Schuler and I are looking at each other like, this is out of a bad science fiction book. This cannot be how our country is run. So I think those are the ones, aside from helping each client on a case-by-case basis, when you get those bigger cases and you're able to effectuate change that makes everyone safer, yeah, you sleep better that night.
I tried a case over $2,000 one time.
From one extreme to the other.
So it's not just the big ones. It's not the national important ones, but this was important to the client. And there was a $16,000 offer, or that we offered to settle the case. They offered 14, and we tried this case. 3 or 4 day trial with a jury. And to make a long story short, not only did we win the case, we won the appeal in the 4th District Court of Appeal, and then it went to the Florida Supreme Court. So over a $2,000 difference, this case had a trial and 2 appeals. So it's not always the big ones that you remember. Sometimes
you made law on that one too, didn't you? That's still the governing law.
I had the misfortune, I think, of having 5 of my cases go to the Florida Supreme Court in the first 10 years of practice. And I say misfortune because those cases drag on for the clients forever and ever. But
that's amazing. You went to trial, took it all the way to the Florida Supreme Court over $2,000. Your client must have been so happy that you made that fight, because a lot of attorneys would have said, $2,000? I'm not going to court over that.
Well, it made good law, but for that particular client, we were fighting at the end over attorney's fees, and because of the ruling and the findings by the court, we were able to get their attorney's fees paid for by the other side.
So that's even better. The fact that you would do that is phenomenal, because most firms
I was going to say foolish, and there's a fine line. What about you? What would you say are some of the bigger ones that stick out?
hard to say. Tried a bunch of big ones. I mean, Mike and I had that nice 3-week trial up in Fort Pierce, which was a lot of fun.
You had that big case, I think, last year. That went on a couple. I think you started it. It got mistried. You had to come back. You started it, and then they had to pay you those attorney's fees.
Yeah, they've had to. Well, I've had a couple where they paid me attorney's fees, and I got attorney's fees out there. But one of the things we're able to do in some of our cases is we can make it such. Typically, we work on a contingency fee, meaning we get a percentage of whatever we collect. But there are some things you can do in the law that could make the other side pay the attorney's fees. So when you try a case, especially when it's not a huge case, I mean, I tried one case, it was extremely difficult, but it wasn't a big case, but it was a really difficult case, and we got a verdict good enough that the defense had to pay my attorney's fees. So my client got that entire verdict, which was great, and he was really appreciative of it because he didn't have to pay fees or our costs. He got that whole verdict, went in his pocket, and we made the insurance company pay us our fees, which was great.
I did have a funny one, though. I like to have fun with this job. It was actually a very sad case regarding a food poisoning that a woman had gotten while she was visiting a resort down in Turks and Caicos. But the funny part was I litigated this case extensively for about 3 years with an attorney named David Newman from New York. And I mean, we did depositions all over the country. We had to go to Turks and Caicos 3 times with depositions down there. We spent a lot of time with each other in hearings and whatnot. And we always had a very cordial relationship, very professional relationship, but I didn't appreciate every aspect of the way he litigated the case and might have ruffled my feathers on a couple of occasions. And towards the end, the trial was coming up and it was the week before the trial. And we were close enough in numbers at that point that I kind of knew it was going to settle. And he called and he said, he called the front receptionist and she says, "Oh, Mr. Weisser, Mr. Newman's on the phone for you." I'm like, "Okay, I'll take the call." I pick it up. I'm like, "Morning, Mr. Newman, how are you?" He goes, "Good morning, Jason. Jason, don't you think after 3 years that you could call me David?" I said, "Mr. Newman, with all due respect, I've called you worse." And of course, I wanted to harken back to Seinfeld and be like, "Newman!" But those are the ones that those stick out in your mind. And it was a good recovery we made for the client, and those definitely stick with you just because the amount of time you put into that is enormous, and you're married to that case. You know everything about it. And then when it ends, you have to move on. You have to then just say, "All right, who's my next person I got to help out?"
So here's one that will end up on the editing room floor, but we tried a case together in Fort Lauderdale, and the judge was being real difficult with us. I mean, everything. I think we lost every objection in that case, every single one we lost. And at some point, and you remember it better, but it ended up. He agreed to fight the other defense attorney, go outside the courtroom and would fight him right then. Now, the guy didn't take him up on it, but the judge said something like, we were at a sidebar, and the judge said something like, "Do you guys want to take this outside?" And he goes, "I'm in. I'm ready."
I said, "I'm ready right now, Judge." And the defense attorney said, "Judge, can I bring my associate with me?" And I said, "Judge, he can bring whoever he wants. Just give me 5 minutes." And the reason it's really funny is you hear stories like this. This case got appealed, and my appellate attorney got the transcript, and he's reading this, and he calls me up and he goes, "Did you really ask him to go outside?" And I said, "The judge made the offer. I just accepted it." And our clients loved us for that because listen, our attorney will beat you in the courtroom and beat you in the street. So it was
Is
funny.
that the one where you had drafted a release to present to the defense lawyer?
That's a different one.
Oh, that's a different one.
That came later. We
the battery release?
yeah.